Please, I'll ask Secretary to call
Those
roll.
were, that was during the.
Mr. Vivens?
Here?
Mr. Coley?
Here.
Mr. Crane? Ms. Deneau?
Here.
Mr. Fishman?
Here,
Mr. Hale? Mr. Horn?
Here.
Mr. Perky?
Here.
Mr. Ramsey?
Here.
Mr. Rangle?
here,
Mr. Smith? Ms. Snyder? Here. Mr. Swan?
Here.
And Ms. Wigginton?
Here.
we have a quorum present, and I'll call the meeting officially to order. You have before you the summarization of the meeting of the industrial board, which was held on October the 15th, 2020. And this is a summary of the minutes. This is not the full and complete minutes. If any of you would like to see the full minutes, you can visit the staff upstairs and they'd be glad to let you review them in total. You have the summary there of the things that did happen at the Thursday, October meeting, and the chair will entertain a motion that summary be approved.
So moved.
Mr. Swan moved, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Langle, second. Any further discussion or questions? If not, all those in favor, let it know, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The motion is carried. On your agenda, the first item is to consider the approval of an amendment to lease the VanHool U.S. Real estate to their manufacturing facility, and I'll call on Marshall for comments. Marshall?
So I guess first I'll call on Jay Mayhan, because he's the one that did the documents.
Yeah, so as you may recall, we entered into a pilot lease with VanHool a couple years ago. They, and Marshall maybe can get in a little bit more of this, but they have, just due to COVID, have pushed back their construction timing. And so this, in the original lease, we had set out a timetable for when they were gonna commence construction and construct the facility. That's been pushed back, so this amendment will allow them to push that timeline back. But it also provides for them to make a pilot payment each year until they start construction. So they would make a pilot payment of $5,000 per year as they're ramping up to start construction. So this just clarifies that and allows them to push back that timeline without being technically in default under the pilot lease. I don't know, Marshall, if you want to.
No, I guess then what that clarifies is that would be an extension of the purchase of the property as well. You know, we usually give people a year to start dirt moving or going vertical. So that would also reflect that as well, I guess, to the pilot. They were very clear that they wanted to show the commitment and they didn't want, free taxes or anything until then. So we agreed on $5,000 a year that they would pay in taxes to satisfy, their property ownership, which in legal terms, I guess that property's in our name. There would be no taxes collected, but they kind of stepped up and said they'd like to pay something to show commitment to the community during that time. So
You have a resolution at your space concerning that, the resolution relating to the First Amendment to lease between the Industrial Board of the City of Morristown and VanHool Manufacturing LLC and VanHool U.S. Real Estate LLC. Chair will entertain a motion for approval.
Mr. Chairman, I've moved to adopt the resolution.
Joe moved. Is there a second? Mr. Rangle, second. Floor is open for discussion or questions. Marshall, in talking with them, I realized with the COVID situation, travel and blah, 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 did they have any indication of possible starting?
right now, they were hesitant to give a total start date. They're gonna do a press release soon to kind of update a timeline. What they're saying is right now Macedonia is running at 20%, Belgium's running at 30%. Belgium's much more shut down. She was complaining she couldn't get her hair cut. They can do takeout food, there's no inside dining, no anything in Belgium right now. So they're much more restricted than us. But what I've kind of said is we're looking at the tourism travel trends, and for leisure travel, they don't see full recovery till 2024. So that's why, if you'll notice in there, we put a start date, I think of 24, maybe December 31, 24. I think that's worst case scenario, because I know they're already pre-selling buses in the US. But I think it's realistic, you know, until old people get on buses to the Grand Canyon, why be here? So that's the challenge we're in.
Any other questions? Anybody? Not call roll, Madam Secretary, all those in favor, let it know by saying aye, all opposed, no.
Mr. Perky?
Aye.
Mr. Ramsey?
Yes.
Mr. Rangel?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Swan?
Yes.
Ms. Wiggington?
Yes.
Mr. Bivens?
Yes.
Mr. Coley?
Yes.
Ms. Deneau?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes,
And Mr. Horn?
Yes.
motion carried, so ordered. The next item on the agenda is the consideration and donation of property to the East Tennessee Progress Center. Marshall?
Okay, this property is what you can see on the TV screens. It's about 2.45 acres. It'll have to be surveyed. See if I can give you a different view of that. So this is the property. You can see it's wooded, and you see this area. It is elevated, and there's actually a gas line that runs through it. So for us, it's essentially unsellable or unbuildable. What we'd like to do is recommend to the city that that property be donated to Odix. Odix could possibly pay the cost to, I guess, drop down that gas line, use it as a driveway. They would be responsible for all closing costs, any costs basically associated with it. We would ask the city to bear no cost in donating that 2.45 acres.
Chair, I entertain a motion that we make that recommendation to the city.
So moved.
Rosemary moved, second.
Second.
Mr. Bivens, second. Any questions or discussion?
Did they ask for that property, or we just on?
Yeah, we've had discussions about it for about 6 months, yeah.
And we presume there's really no other future better use than to allow
No,
them to
that's
use
the
this.
big, Randy can tell you about that East Tennessee natural gas line. It's an issue in there.
It's, you got a large right of way, that site's awful rocky. So, and I mean, to even bring it down to the road, there's really nothing buildable on it. So if we can put it into somebody's care, that's probably better.
It's probably 10 to 15 foot higher in elevation as well as the road itself. So it's not really usable. And it may help them for truck routing and some other things in the future.
Show them the other picture, Jody, or Marshall.
That one.
Yeah, you can see, Odix could use it coming right across there without too much trouble.
Yeah, you can kind of see the elevation from the road.
But as it goes up, it's just,
You can see.
Any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion, let it know by saying aye. As your name's called, all opposed, no. Call roll, Madam Secretary.
Ms. Wiggington?
Yes.
Mr. Bivens?
Yes.
Mr. Coley?
yes.
Ms. Deneau?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes,
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Perky?
Aye.
Mr. Ramsey?
Yes.
Mr. Rangel?
yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mr. Swan?
Yes.
It's unanimous and so ordered. The next item on the agenda is consideration of resolution for Project Mercury. And Marshall, you want to comment on that?
Yeah,
You have
so,
before you a resolution. Let me get that on the
Okay.
table first. All those in favor of not all those in favor, but I need a motion for the approval of Project Mercury, and then we'll discuss it. Mr. Ryan will move. Who? Any other second? Need a second?
Second.
Ms. Snyder? Okay, now the floor is open to discussion. Marshall?
Okay, so what this project is, and each of the next three you see, their names will be released once documents are signed by them. And we'll do a formal announcement and, try to get some publicity. Hopefully, we'd love to start doing groundbreakings again, but we've kind of avoided those lately. This project is a $61.5 million investment over 5 years, 50 new jobs, and we were actually competing to retain 200 jobs in Morristown on this one. They qualify for a 3-year, 75% abatement on personal property, and it is in the automotive industry.
What was the investment?
61.5 million.
Any other questions?
Are they currently here, is that what you mean?
They are, yes.
Okay, so
Yep.
that-
$200 jobs and $61.5 million investment. That's not bad coming out of COVID. Anybody have any questions? This is for a pilot project for Project Mercury. Any other questions? Questions been called for? All those in favor, let it know by saying, as your name's called, say aye. All opposed, no. Call roll, Madam Secretary.
Mr. Rangel?
Aye.
Ms. Snyder? Yes. Mr. Swan?
Yes.
Ms. Wiggington?
Yes.
Mr. Bivens?
Yes.
Mr. Coley?
Yes.
Ms. Deneau?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes?
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Perky? And Mr. Ramsey?
Yes.
Unanimous and so ordered. Next item on the agenda is a resolution relating to payment in lieu of tax transaction for Project Cameron. Chair will entertain a motion for approval.
Mr. Chairman, get it on the floor, I move to adopt the resolution.
Mr. Swan so moved. Is there a second?
Mr. Perky. Mr. Perky. I'll second. Mr. Swan will second. Mr. Perky made
I'm
the
sorry.
That has happened many times
It's the mask.
motion.
It's, uh,
Mask effect.
The motion is on the floor, and the floor is open for discussion. Marshall?
So this is Project Cameron. It represents a $21.1 million investment, 25 new jobs, and they will qualify for a 3-year, 65% abatement on personal property. So they're also an existing industry as well.
Any questions? Anybody? Discussion? If not, call the roll, Madam Secretary. All those in favor of the resolution for Project Cameron, let it know by saying yes. All opposed, no. Call roll.
Mr. Perky?
Aye.
Mr. Ramsey?
Yes.
Mr. Rangel?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder? Yes. Mr. Swan?
Yes.
Ms. Wiggington?
Yes.
Mr. Bivens?
Yes.
Mr. Coley?
Yes.
Ms. Deneau?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
And Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Unanimous and so ordered. The next item on the agenda is consideration of a pilot project for Project Nandina. You have the resolution there in front of you. Chair will entertain a motion for approval of that resolution.
Move.
Mr. Wright will move.
Second.
Mr. Coley, second. Floor is open for discussion. Marshall?
So again, this project, the smallest one of the bunch, it's just a $124 million investment over 4 years. 200 jobs initially, but they will scale back down to 50 once all the equipment's installed. And I think what we're seeing clearly with this project is it is much cheaper to invest in equipment than people today. I think as long as we continue to incentivize unemployment, it makes it easy for companies to invest in equipment. So 124 million investment, long-term 50 new jobs, they qualify for a 3-year 75% abatement on that personal property.
Any questions or discussion? Anyone? Not, call roll, Madam Secretary, all those in favor of the resolution, let it know by saying, aye, as your name's called, all opposed, no, call roll, Madam Secretary.
Mr. Rangel?
Aye.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Swan?
Yes.
Ms. Wiggington?
Yes.
Mr. Bivens?
Yes.
Mr. Coley?
Yes.
Ms. Deneau?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes?
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Perky?
Aye.
And Mr. Ramsey?
Yes.
Motion is unanimous and so ordered. The next item on the agenda is consideration approval of an increase to the pilot program fee. Mr. Ramsey.
So currently, we've been at $5,000 per pilot to the companies, and this would not apply to anything approved today. This would only be going forward. Currently, the cost to implement pilots have went up. There's additional, newspaper posting fees. I guess the newspapers wanted to make more money than they did in the 50s. But there's additional requirements of the industrial board posting things that we haven't had to post in the past. And talking with Jay as well, I think looking at other communities, Jay, can you give some examples of kind of where we're way short?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the $5,000 closing fee is probably low compared to a lot of the surrounding communities and really across the state. We typically, for communities of this size, we typically would see at least a fee of about $10,000. And then in some of the larger areas, they even calculate the fee based on a percentage of the savings over the long term. That sometimes disincentivizes companies because the fees can get pretty high. Like in Memphis, sometimes they'll charge fees of hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on the total amount that they're abating over the year, which seems to start disincentivizing, rather than what pilots are supposed to do, to incentivize companies to come. But Marshall and I talked about it, and additional requirements that the state, is requiring regarding putting notice in the paper, and just administratively to administer the pilots throughout the terms of the pilots, to make sure the pilot bills are being sent correctly, and working with the assessor to collect on those, and just help with the process. It helps, a higher closing fee will help with those administrative costs also.
Yeah. So my thought, I don't think we even go to 10 yet. I'd suggest 7,500 up from 5, and then maybe in a few years we revisit and see if that's still fair. We don't, like Jay said, we don't want to disincentivize anybody from doing it, but generally, they're receiving much more benefit than an extra $2,500. So that's what I would propose, Mr. Chairman, an increase from 5,000 to 7,500 per pilot.
And are you putting that in form of a motion?
I am.
You've heard the motion, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Horn, second. Floor is open for discussion.
I'll also say Marshall does an incredible job of going out and beating the bushes for these companies, and a lot of the surrounding communities are really jealous of the type of investment that Morristown gets, and the types of companies that you guys have brought to the community. And so I don't know, I just want to mention that Marshall, it takes going out and really finding these companies and spending time and effort, and Marshall does an incredible job.
And we know Jody does the real work, because she has to do the follow-up. The real work does come at the end when she's working with Jay and the assessor, and the company doesn't, you get a new CFO, and they say, what is this? Why are we paying this? What does that mean? You own our equipment? So Jody goes through that usually multiple times a year with a few companies that change people more often than not. But we know Jody does all the real work.
Any
That
further-
is something
any
that
further
you
discussion?
keep, the IDB keeps, right?
Usually it's been passed over to the chamber
Oh.
for the administration and for the work
Oh,
done
I
there.
see.
It actually helps pay for our time to go out and do the work.
Yeah.
Further questions or discussion? If not, all those in favor say yes as your name's called. All opposed, no. Call roll, Madam Secretary.
Mr. Ramsey?
Yes.
Mr. Rangel?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Swan?
Yes.
Ms. Wigington?
Yes.
Mr. Bivens?
Yes.
Mr. Coley?
Yes.
Ms. Deneau?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes,
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
And Mr. Perky?
it's unanimous and so ordered. Is there any other new business or old business to come before the board?
I'll give a quick update if that's okay on total projects. I know we talked about 3 here. Today, we have 8 expansions going, total of 775 jobs and $450 million that we're looking at so far in 2021. So the year's looking to be pretty good. Prospect activity starting to pick up again. We're starting to see people travel and, you know, you're starting to get a lot of projects. Not a lot that I would say we won't. You all know we turned down a lot of projects because they're just not either community-minded or environmentally minded. So we're pretty careful with that. Jody hurt somebody's feelings last week. And that's interesting to have a consultant call you and say that's the first time we've ever been turned down in writing by a community. But we want to be careful with who locates in our community and how they act and feel and treat the environment around them. And we do the most homework we can before that to make sure it's the right companies. So we are starting to see some people travel, not as much foreign. Most of what we're seeing is within the U.S. so far. We're submitting on foreign projects, but they're not traveling, you know, getting out to visit yet. So hopefully that opens up as well soon. We can kind of do something early in the year. The city's done a good job on Lot 12. I think that's almost finished. Still got some seed to put down. But we do have that 85-acre pad now ready to go as well. So we're starting to get some interest from that. Quite a bit of interest. So that's where we're being careful. We don't have a lot of big lots left, so how do we make sure we get the right one there?
The folks to be sitting here 30 or 60 days after a year like 2020 and have approved $206 million and the number of jobs, and already have under construction another 205 or 6, giving you what he said, $450 million of new stuff is going to be in our community for the end of this calendar year of 2021. That's unbelievable. And I want to certainly thank Jody and Marshall for the job that they do of presenting our community. It's obviously been a different, I can tell from your business. I know now everybody operates like Susan Deneau, and it's just like it's always been. But this business trying to operate the doors half open and people with masks and et cetera, to have 2021 to know that we're going to have 775 new jobs. That's unbelievable, particularly when you're following the year that we are following. I want to thank them for it, and likewise, this is not only done by the chamber. We have the city representatives here, Tony and Gary and the planner that are here, and it takes a cooperation from everybody to make that happen and to continue to build our community. The industrial appreciation thing that was in December that was put out, who did that for us?
Becky Rehorn.
Becky, she did a tremendous, if you haven't seen it, she did a tremendous job of putting that together in recognizing the industries that we have. And likewise, the reason I mention that is because when you think of the other major things that are going to take place in our community in the next 18 to 24 months, it's really phenomenal. And Mayor, the Civic Center is under construction and underway. Would you like to make a comment on it?
We're looking forward to it. Good weather.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, if you ask me to tell a little, it usually results in long. So the construction is underway. Dirt has been moved, the equipment moving on. They tell us 18 months, and the people who are managing it are in place. All of the, I guess you'd call construction infrastructure, it seems to be falling in place as advertised, and it's the management company that's going to run it. I think we're finding partners who want to be involved in when we say partners, it means they're going to write a check to be involved, and Tony's more closely involved with that than I am, but I think it's something that we're going to really be proud of, and we're eager to cut a ribbon.
And likewise, I suppose the good news and the bad news. The bad news is we have to have it, but they've started tearing down houses over around the present jail type of thing, and that's going to be a phenomenal improvement for our community, to where the state's every week not saying that we're not in compliance type of thing, and so that's underway. So 2021 right at this moment sure looks different than the 202 turned out to be. There's no question about it. Anybody have any questions, discussion, comments?
We adjourn.
Been moved, we adjourn. Is there a second? Second. So I have a second. All those in favor, let it know, saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Motion's carried.
I always wondered.